First, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Dottie Head. I'm the Director of Membership and Communications for Atlanta Audubon. This webinar was initially supposed to be our March monthly meeting, and then COVID intervened, and Chris and Larry were kind enough to reschedule with us. So we're very excited to have them here tonight. I wanted to remind you of a couple of events that we have coming up. We've been doing a virtual bird walk on Facebook Live every Friday morning at 9 a.m. on the Atlanta Audubon Facebook page. It's a lot of fun. We are seeing some good birds, even though it's summer and migration is over, so we hope you'll join us. Georgianne Schmalz, ornithologist and good friend to Atlanta Audubon, is offering a two-part series on birding by ear on Sunday, June 28th and Sunday, July 12th. You can register for these on our website. I will post a link after I get done with making my introductions. And we're having another webinar this Sunday. Our monthly meeting speaker, Jonah McDonald, is going to be talking about his new book, Atlanta's Secrets, Hidden Trails, and of course, Birds. I hope you'll join us for that. That is also a free webinar. Today, just this afternoon, we announced an event that we're co-hosting with Eagle Eye Bookshop in Decatur. We're hosting a webinar with David Sibley, the author and illustrator of the Sibley Field Guides to Birds and the recently released New York Times bestseller, What It's Like to Be a Bird. This webinar is going to be held on Wednesday, August 19th at 7 p.m. and you can register on our website. Again, I'll post a link when I get done with the introductions. If you're enjoying all this free content that Atlanta Audubon is offering, we hope you will consider becoming a member or making a donation on our website, atlantaaudubon.org. And finally, as we proceed with the presentation, Chris is going to be doing most of the presenting, and Larry and I are going to be moderating. Larry is going to chime in. So if you have questions, ask them in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll do our best to get to them, but we do have a large crowd tonight. And we need to be cognizant of time, but Larry is going to help by kind of answering as the presentation goes on. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Chris Mowry is an associate professor of biology at Berry College. He's lived in Metro Atlanta since 1982 and received his PhD in biology from Emory University. As an animal ecologist, he studies both coyotes and African primates. His work with coyotes began in 2002. He teaches undergraduate courses in zoology, behavioral ecology, and conservation biology. Larry Wilson is an adjunct professor in the departments of biology and environmental sciences at Emory University. He retired from Fernbank Science Center, so I'm guessing he knows Georgianne, where he worked as a manager of Fernbank Forest and as an ecologist for over 30 years. His research interests include chemical defenses of plants and animals, and animal-human conflict species, both in the southeastern United States and Namibia, Africa. He is currently conducting research on amphibian declines, coyotes, poison frogs, and hellbenders. He teaches courses in tropical ecology, field studies in the upper Amazon rainforest of Peru, and a month-long field course on environmental field studies in southern Africa at Emory University. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chris and Larry. Thank you guys for coming this evening.
Thank you, Dottie. Thanks to Atlanta Audubon for hosting us. We're happy to be here. So let me just jump right in. Thanks to all of you who have tuned in tonight. So we're going to tell you about our work as biologists studying coyotes in this project that we call the Atlanta Coyote Project. So I'll start with this iconic picture here that Larry took in Piedmont Park in December of 2018, I believe it was. No, this is not photoshopped. We've been accused of that, but no, this is a great photo that Larry got. This coyote had been hanging around in Piedmont Park, and I got a call about it. I said, Larry, get down there with your camera, and he captured just a great series of photographs, including this one. So we do have coyotes, of course, in urban environments, and this is proof of that. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Atlanta Coyote Project. And I think I first need to just give a little introduction about how I know Larry. As Dottie said, Larry and I both came out of Emory University. Larry was finishing the PhD program under our mentor, Dr. Don Shore, as I was entering. And so you know, Larry left, and then I continued on with graduate school, and Larry was at Fernbank, and I would see him occasionally, and I always admired him, one of the best field biologists I've ever seen. And So as I sort of progressed in through my career, it was students at Barry. I was at Barry College, and students got me involved in studying coyotes just kind of locally. And Larry and I would talk about it, and he said, you know, we really should someday look at urban coyote populations. And I gave a talk down at Fernbank Science Center, and we kept talking about it. And so finally we did something about it. And so in 2015, we formed what we call the Atlanta Coyote Project. And we have a very extensive website. If you have not visited it, it's atlantacoyoteproject.org. Lots of great information there. But so we formed this organization in 2015, and we essentially look at it as a threefold mission. We provide public education and outreach like we're doing tonight. The website also allows us to collect data from the public in the form of coyote observation. So you can go to our website and report an observation of a coyote, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And essentially the project forms the framework for our scientific research on coyotes and other forms of urban wildlife. So that was our intent in forming this project, and that's essentially what we do with it. But we are biologists, we are scientists who study coyotes and other forms of urban wildlife. So we're going to basically cover 5 things tonight, and then if we have time at the end, questions. But again, if you have questions as we go along, you can enter those into the chat, and Larry will try to respond to those, or either one of us. But first, I just want to give a brief background on North American canids, including coyotes, of course. And some of you, if you've heard some of this talk before, I apologize. Maybe you've seen some of these slides, but I just like to set the framework about the animal that we're talking about. And in order to do that, I need to tell you a little bit about the other North American canids. So we'll do that first. Then we're going to talk about coyotes and biodiversity. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the reported coyote observations that we've been collecting over the last few years. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what we call an urban wildlife study through an organization called the Urban Wildlife Information Network. Then we're going to talk about Carmine, and if you don't know who Carmine is, you will soon enough. And then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. So let's just first of all talk about North American canids. And when I say a canid, I'm talking about a dog-like mammal. And so these 4 animals are all members of the genus Canis. So if you look at the scientific name, it all starts with Canis. And so Canis lupus is the gray wolf. Canis rufus is the red wolf, the coyote is Canis latrans, and the domestic dog is Canis familiaris. So they're all separate species, meaning theoretically that they are reproductively isolated from one another. They are geographically isolated from one another in some instances, but the concept of speciation is not always as clean as we like to think it is. And so, but these are different animals. They are different species of animals, but they are of course related to one another. They share the same genus, which is Canis. Now, these 2 animals, the gray wolf and the red wolf, of course, are referred to by color, but I'll tell you that color is not a good way to describe these animals. Gray wolves can be black, they can be gray, they can be white. Red wolves, again, are not necessarily all that red, sometimes they are. Coyotes can be a variety of colors. And then, of course, domestic dogs come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, and that's because of human artificial selection. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But of course, our focus tonight is on the coyote, Canis latrans. But in order to fully understand this animal, we do need to talk a little bit about these other 3 cousins to the coyote. So this is a map from our colleague Bridget Von Holt, who may be on part of this. Maybe she's tuned in. I hope that she is, and we may unmute her later on to get her to weigh in if she would like to. But anyway, so Bridget, thank you for the use of this map. But it shows the historic distribution of wolves and coyotes in North America. And so what you're seeing here is the gray color. So we're seeing essentially the eastern half of the United States, of course. And so the gray coloration is the historic distribution of the gray wolf, Canis lupus. The red is the historic distribution of the red wolf, Canis rufus. So that's one of the first things you can see, is that red wolves were in a different part of North America than gray wolves. So gray wolves primarily west of the Mississippi River, but also on up in here into Canada and around in the Great Lakes region as well, touching here into the very northeastern part of the US. But so the gray is the gray wolf, the red is the red wolf historically, and then these green lines, that's the historic distribution of the coyote. So you can see that the coyote and the gray wolf essentially co-evolved together in the same general geographic area. So they grew up together. They co-evolved. Essentially, again, coyotes restricted to west of the Mississippi River. Coyotes were not here in the southeastern United States, and that's primarily because red wolves kept them out. They were competitors, and so they were not in this particular part of North America, historically speaking. Now, Bridget had created on this map this so-called admixture zone, and this is an area where there likely was some hybridization that was going on between and among these animals. We know this from genetic data, so I don't want to get too much into this, but I do want to say, as I said earlier, that these are separate species, but the distinctions, the so-called reproductive isolating mechanisms that are in place that keep these animals apart from one another, some of them were geographic. You know, coyotes were in the west and red wolves were here in the east, and so they didn't come into contact with one another. Gray wolves in the west and coyotes in the west, very different animals size-wise. Gray wolf, a very large animal, over 100 pounds. Coyote, a small animal, 25 pounds. So not much opportunity for hybridization, for interbreeding. But here in this admixture zone, gray wolves a little bit smaller, coyotes move in a little bit, and there likely was some hybridization that probably went on in this area. And another, this is a cladogram, essentially a phylogenetic tree that, again, Bridget has used in a paper before. And I bring this up just simply to show the relatedness of these animals, at least the dog, the gray wolf, and the coyote. And this is the way that these kinds of things are put together is there's fossil evidence, there's biogeography evidence, in other words, where these animals are found in the world. And then, of course, nowadays we have molecular tools where we can look at DNA and get a better understanding at the relatedness, at the closeness or distance of relatedness, just like people are doing with 23andMe and all of those kinds of things. So we can use DNA to get a more thorough understanding about the relatedness of species. And so what you can see on this graph here is that about a million years ago, is this divergence. Here's a common ancestor between the gray wolf, the dog, and the coyote. And so, but they diverged. The coyote diverged from the gray wolf long ago. The dog is a direct descendant of the gray wolf, mainly through human artificial selection. We chose those gray wolves that had traits that we desired as humans, tameness, and generally tameness, and we started through selecting for those gray wolves. We essentially created this species, what we now call the domestic dog, Canis familiaris. And again, I bring that up now just because it's going to factor a little bit into our story of Carmine, perhaps later on. And again, if Bridget is on here and she wants to weigh in later on, I would be happy to.
She is on, Chris.
She is. Okay. Bridget, hi. You're muted, I guess. But anyway.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you for joining us. And Bridget, if you have anything you would like to jump in and say that I misspoke on or you would like to add, please feel free.
No, this is fantastic. I'm happy to help at any point if anyone has questions, but I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. Thank you for joining us. All right, so we've got a lot to talk about, so I don't want we'll come back to some of this, but let's talk a little bit more about coyotes then and the characteristics of coyotes, because again, in order to understand these animals, we need to understand their natural history, their biology, their behavior. And so First of all, coyotes here, at least in the Southeast, are about 25 to 40 pounds. A 40-pound coyote would be a very large coyote. They're smaller than most people think. They are smaller than wolves. They're much smaller than gray wolves. They're smaller than red wolves. They are larger than foxes. I bring that up simply because a fox is a relative of a coyote. It's not in the same genus, and we have red foxes and gray foxes here in the Southeast, but sometimes people will confuse them. But coyotes are larger than foxes, but smaller than wolves. And again, about 25 to 40 pounds. And depending on the time of year, a coyote will look much larger than it actually is because it will have a very thick coat. And it will lose that coat just like your dog would shed its fur in the summertime, and the coyote will look smaller in the summer and larger in the winter. But we hear that over and over again. Oh, I saw, you know, a coyote, it was 80 pounds, it was 90 pounds. And no, you're not seeing, those animals are not that big. Now, the behavior of coyotes, they are family-oriented mammals, as are all canids. And so they live in family groups. They are trying to live as residents. That means they're trying to establish a territory and live there in a small family group. That means mom and dad and their kids, so sub-adults. And some of those kids might stick around for a year or two to help raise subsequent brothers and sisters, or they may all simply disperse. But mom and dad will theoretically mate for life. They will try to establish a territory, hold on to that territory. The size of the territory depends upon where they're living. Just like some people live in cities and some people live in the country, you know, and on large pieces of land, and people in the city live in small plots of land, so do coyotes. They're very adaptable animals, and they can live in very small geographic small areas or large areas. So, but they are trying to find a mate, and they're trying to settle down and have a territory. Now, those that don't have that, they are what we call transients. They're solitary. They're out floating on the landscape looking for a mate so they can establish a territory. So we have two very different behavioral patterns here. And so as a result, the distance that they are going to move can vary greatly. If you're a resident, you're going to stay close to home and establish your territory. If you're a transient, you're out there looking for a mate and looking for a place to live, and you're going to travel much farther and wider, generally speaking. Now, it's also important behaviorally is that both parents are involved in the rearing of the offspring, as are potentially older siblings, if they are around. They may have dispersed and gone on and tried to form their own families, but mom and dad are both responsible for raising the offspring. Of course, the mom is going to give birth and she's going to nurse those pups, but they grow up fast, and dad is nearby. He's going to start bringing solid food back to the den. He's going to regurgitate that food. He's going to give mom a break. Female's going to go off and she's going to hunt herself and bring food back to the den. So they're both involved in the rearing of the offspring, again, as might be older brothers and sisters. Very seasonal breeders, these animals are. They breed in the winter. There's a 63-day gestation period. So that means that pups are born in the spring. And what Larry and I are seeing is these pups are being born in the middle of March. And that's somewhat surprising to us. We thought it was happening a little bit later, but we are consistently seeing evidence that pups are being born in the middle of March, and they are sexually mature in their first year. So that means by the next year, theoretically, a coyote could give birth. A coyote that was born one year in the next year could give birth to its own pups. Now, of course, you need a mate, you need territory in order to do that, and that doesn't always occur. But theoretically, physiologically, they are sexually mature in their first year of life. Very elusive animals. They often become crepuscular, meaning active at dawn or dusk, or they can become nocturnal when they live in close proximity to humans. So again, behaviorally, very adaptable, lots of plasticity, as we say, in their behavior. So we often say, well, hear people say, well, I saw a coyote out during the day, it must be rabid. No, you know, coyotes are very commonly seen during the day. If you see them in areas where they're not being harassed or there aren't humans around, they're active during the day. We just tend to see them at night around here because they're trying to avoid people. They really want nothing to do with us. So seeing a coyote out during the day is not necessarily a sign that something is wrong. And in fact, I'm not going to get a whole lot into this, but rabies is extremely rare in coyotes. As I said, successful in a variety of habitat types. We see coyotes in rural environments. We see them in urban environments. Coyotes have been found in Central Park in New York. They're in downtown Chicago. They're in Piedmont Park here in Atlanta. You know, they do very well in a wide variety of habitat types. And mainly that's because they're omnivores. They don't need to be hunting large prey like wolves. They eat lots of fruits and seeds. They eat small mammals. They eat insects. They eat just anything that we eat. Essentially, a coyote would eat. If they have the opportunity to raid garbage, you know, they may do that. They may eat roadkill if given the opportunity. But again, think about, you're talking about an animal that's between, you know, around 30 pounds. That's a small dog size. And so it is going to be eating prey items that it can easily obtain and handle. And so again, a very wide diet, very omnivorous animals. And then finally, they use auditory and olfactory mechanisms to maintain those territories and to communicate with one another. So again, if you think about what they're trying to do, maintain a territory and have a family group, just like we do. You know, what do? You build a fence. You know, establish property boundaries. Well, coyotes do the same things. They mark their territory. They make vocalizations to tell rivals, hey, this is my area, stay away. They are communicating with other members of the family group. You know, maybe their mate, hey, I'm over here, where are you? And so that vocalization serves a purpose, both for, again, establishing and maintaining territory and communicating with other members of the group. Now, as I mentioned, coyotes are very seasonal breeders. They will create some sort of a den. Oftentimes it is an excavated hole in the ground, but we've seen all sorts of dens, vacant culverts, for example, you know, emptied out logs, little caves, whatever they can find, but they're very difficult to find. Again, these
even under people's back porches.
Yes, even under people's back porches, that's right. This particular den, though, is here in the metro Atlanta area. We've had our eye on this for a while. We've had a camera on it. And this is May the 19th, it looks like. And so we're not sure. We've been showing this picture to Bridget, but anyway, we think this is the two parents. And there's the den right there. And here we are on May the 28th. We see 5 pups right there. We think there might have been a 6th one, but we're not sure. But so we've been keeping a close eye, you know, very cute little guys and girls. You can see that, interestingly, one of these is a little darker than the others are. And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. But this is an excavated hole in the ground. We, just to give you an idea, there was another den that we were monitoring in another part of town for a few years. And we stuck a camera down that den, and it was 11 feet deep. And in fact, you can see a video of that on our website if you're interested in going back and looking at that. But keep in mind that the den is only used for about 6 to 8 weeks, Larry, would you say?
Yes, and if there's any disturbance, they'll very quickly change sites. And obviously, because of ectoparasites, they will change den sites as well. So
the den is, you know, the mom gives birth, pups grow up fast, and then they're done with the den. They don't need the den anymore. So they're not using, this is not a year-round residence. Now they will come back and reuse a den. So, but as Larry says, they'll abandon it as well if they feel like they've been discovered. Okay, so we need to talk about range expansion. So I talked earlier, I showed that slide from Bridget's paper about the historic distribution, and then I said that the coyotes have expanded their range. And so this is a paper by Hody and Kay, some other friends of ours, from 2018. And what you're looking at is coyote distribution through time, beginning in about 1900. So so you're looking at by decade here. So the red shows 1900. So now we're seeing all of North America and Central America. So you can see that, again, coyotes were essentially west of the Mississippi River and east of the or east of the Sierra Nevada mountains. But down into Mexico and into Central America, and then you can just kind of follow along on the colors of the map, and you can see that there was this gradual expansion. It expanded westward, expanded up into Alaska, it expanded up here into the Canada and northeastern US, and it expanded here into the southeast, the southeastern US. They are still pushing down through Central America. You can see, if you look at this close-up portion of the map, they are knocking on the door of South America, and many researchers believe it's just a matter of time before coyotes reach South America, which is, so, but here in Georgia, you can see that it really was, it's, you know, it depends on where in Georgia you're talking about it, but it really was 1980s, 1990s that coyotes were seen here in Georgia, but they're now found in every state except for Hawaii, again, throughout Alaska, Canada, Central America. So very widely distributed. So the question is why? Why did this range expansion? Well, we already talked about the first reason, and that is the eradication of top predators, wolves. You know, we as humans have a real love-hate relationship with predators and wolves. They're competitors. We fear them. They like the same kinds of things we do in the form of livestock. And so we unfortunately have been very good at eradicating top predators. We wiped out gray wolves. We essentially all but have driven the red wolf to extinction. There are still gray wolves. There are very few red wolves left in the wild. So as we wiped out those predators, and by the way, these pictures are all of coyotes. These were taken in the metro Atlanta region. So these are all coyotes, but so the first reason for expansion, the eradication of wolves, the second, habitat modification. As we created agricultural land and we urbanized, perfect habitat for coyotes. It creates edge, it creates perfect habitat for rodents that coyotes feed upon, it creates crops that coyotes could eat, it creates more open land. It's, again, perfect for coyotes. So those two factors in particular help us to understand this gradual expansion of coyotes. All right, one more use of Bridget's map here. So again, as we as humans, you know, and particularly this happened in the eastern part as human settlements increased in the eastern part of the US, we wiped out the red wolf. It allowed the coyote to move in. We wiped out gray wolves in this part of North America, again, allowed the coyote to move in. And as it doesn't happen overnight though, as these gray and red wolf populations dwindled and coyotes moved in, there were opportunities for hybridization to occur. Sort of love the one you're with. You know, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And so it did happen. There was some hybridization that did go on there. And we call that admixture. And this on Bridget's map is this likely spot that they have seen where some of this early hybridization admixture occurred. One last thing about wolves, and then we'll move on. This little red dot right here, this is the only place in the world where there are wild red wolves. This is a place called Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. It's in coastal North Carolina. There are about 35 red wolves in the wild. And guess what? They're hybridizing with coyotes because coyotes have moved in there. So that's a whole nother story for a different day. But anyway. All right, so moving on. First, the next thing I want to talk about then is that there is a common misconception that the presence of predators leads to a decrease in biodiversity. In other words, we often hear this story, oh, coyotes are present, they must be eating everything in sight. And in fact, this sort of logic has been used, unfortunately, in coyote eradication programs. There was one that was done here in our own state of Georgia, unfortunately. And so, you know, we realized that this was not the case. Larry and I had data from our studies that were showing this was not the case. And so, you know, we decided to try to publish some information to kind of dispel this misguided conception that the presence of a predator, in this case of a coyote, was leading to a loss of biodiversity. So we published this paper a year ago in a journal called Urban Naturalist, Species Richness Within an Urban Coyote Territory in Atlanta, Georgia. So just to briefly tell you a little bit about it, this was the study site was in Roswell, Georgia. As some of you are familiar with where that is. It was a 20-hectare mixed pine hardwood suburban green space. In other words, it was just in suburbia. It was a nice forested area surrounded by neighborhoods, which we have a lot of here in Atlanta. In March of 2016, an active coyote den was detected by some of the neighbors, and we were told about this. We knew that there were pups. We saw them. They had been seen coming in and out of the den. So we knew reproduction was going on. So we deployed cameras shortly thereafter, and we had them up for over 2 years. So from May 2016 to May 2018, in fact, it went a little longer than that. And during that time, we had cameras deployed throughout this 20-hectare green space. We collected over 3,000 images of mammals, birds, and reptiles. And when I say deployed cameras, I'm talking about remote motion sensitive cameras that are attached to trees where an animal walks by, flies by, something like that. It triggers the camera and it takes either a picture or a video, and we collected all of those images. And so we ended up with thousands and thousands of images, and we, with the help of our students, went through all of those. And so just to touch on the highlights, we got 536 separate coyote detections on 267 different days. We saw pups in all 3 years of the study, 2016, 17, and 18. So that means the point is that there was an active coyote family that was reproducing each year in this site. Yet we saw high species richness. We documented 12 different mammalian species, 22 different bird species, 2 different reptile species. And so this is an indication of a healthy ecosystem where predators are part of a healthy ecosystem. And if you're interested, I'll show you one more slide about this, but if you're interested in reading this paper or seeing some of the video evidence that we have, you can go to our website under the research heading, and there's a link to urban biodiversity. You can download the paper, you can watch a video about it. We just saw some really neat stuff. But this is just
Chris,
a few.
yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say is we need to add just how rare some of these things are. Is things like weasels and river otters and bobcats. It's not something you typically think about occurring in Roswell and in the metro area.
Exactly. So here, this picture, this slide is just trying to highlight some of that. Some of these are common, but certainly there was no scarcity of deer, no scarcity of rabbits. And as Larry is saying, we're seeing some unique mammalian species, or some mammalian species that people are very surprised. And again, you can see video of a lot of these. So bobcats and red foxes and river otters and least weasels. And again, a lot of really great migratory birds coming through, as well as year-round residents. And so to the contrary, this is not an area that was devoid of biodiversity, but it was showing high biodiversity. So we believe the take-home messages from this is that predators are a necessary component of any healthy ecosystem. Now there's an absence of an apex or a top predator in southeastern terrestrial ecosystems now, since we wiped out, or we extirpated. Extirpation means to remove a species in a particular area. So we've essentially driven the red wolf to extinction, as I mentioned. So, Larry and I have had discussions about this. We don't know exactly how the coyote fits in. It's not an exact replacement of the red wolf. It's more of an omnivore. It's a smaller animal, but it's got to be near the top of the food chain here. It's probably having some effect on these species below it, but that's not necessarily a negative thing. It may be keeping rodents in check that might be preying upon ground nesting birds, or maybe some of these smaller foxes that might be preying upon birds, or again, keeping other species in check. And so we know that coyotes are present throughout Metro Atlanta, yet we have evidence that overall biodiversity is high, and we don't think that there's anything unique about this particular situation. So this will lead us into some of our other work. It is vitally important to protect these green spaces that many species depend upon, species that we don't normally see, but they're out there. We just don't necessarily see them all the time. Okay, well, the next topic that I want to talk about is another thing that we're involved in, as I said, is that our website is used as a source for us to collect data. And so if you go to our website, you can click on a link that says report a sighting, and you'll be taken to this page, and you'll see an interactive map. And so we've collected data beginning in 2015. People can go to our website and report a coyote observation, and they can put the date and the time. They can decide whether it's a sighting or an encounter. We have a definition that is somewhat vague down here. A sighting is an observation at a distance with no interaction. An encounter is an interaction at close range. They can then give observations or comments or concerns, and they can provide us with an email address if they'd like. And if they actually have any sort of photographic evidence, photos, videos, they can send those to us as well. So we've been collecting this data. So we have a paper that we hope will be published soon. It's currently in review in a journal called Human Dimensions of Wildlife. And just a little bit of a summary of that. So what we're seeing here on the left, here's a map of Metro Atlanta. You can see the different colors are representing different landscape types. So light blue wetlands and darker blue water and so on. And then we've got low density development, high density development here in the, so just to sort of get you oriented, for those of you, most of you are familiar with Atlanta, here's Lake Lanier up here, here's Lake Allatoona up here. So of course, here's downtown Atlanta. So the red colors represent the highest density development, which of course is within the city, and then on the outskirts, it's less developed. And then all of the black dots, those are our coyote observations that have been reported to us. So here's just a little summary of that data. Now, the data didn't start to be collected until October of 2015. So 2015 only represents 3 months worth of data. So that's why that bar is so low. The y-axis is showing the number of coyote observations. So we had that many, whatever that is, I don't know, 50 some in 2015. In 2016, that's a full year's worth of data. People started learning about our site. So we got about 500 reports then. 2017, it went up to about 600. 2018, a little less than 600. And those numbers have continued on. We're continuing to collect data. We get probably 1.5 reports a day to our website. And again, these numbers, we don't think the coyote population is increasing. Just people are learning more about our site and our reporting. And so you'll also see that on the legend here is that a bar is represented. An entire bar is the total number of observations. And again, we divided those into sightings, which are the black part of the bar, and then encounters, which is the gray part of the bar. So between 2015 and 2018, we received over 1,600 total reports. We did do some socioeconomic analysis on that data, and we did see, not a big surprise, that there was a bias towards areas of higher income and education. In other words, we received more reports from those. We use census data, and so we did receive more reports from areas of higher income and higher education attainment. We were able to link that to the census data. But what we did find is that human coyote encounters, and remember that an encounter we defined as an interaction at close range, these were rare. There were 196 total over the 4 years, in other words, 12% of those observations. And most of those encounters or those interactions dealt with pets. Not necessarily the death of a pet or a pet attack, but something where somebody felt uncomfortable. In some instances, certainly there were cases where pets were attacked or taken. But again, this definition of encounter, it's a little bit hard to define every sort of interaction using just one word. So there is a little bit of nuance in the description of these encounters. But I think the point is that they are certainly the vast minority of the reports that we receive. In other words, the majority of reports that we receive are simply benign observations of coyotes. Hey, I saw a coyote, I'm just reporting it. And that's not all that surprising. Now, we did do GIS analysis of this data and found that observations were more likely in riparian wetland regions. So these areas, so this would be stream areas, wetlands, stream corridors, also areas of low density development. These are defined as parks, golf courses, and large lot homes. And again, these are, we can talk about why these types of areas, would be possibly more preferable to coyotes, and we talk a bit about that in the paper. So just due to time, I'm not going to go into all of that, but hopefully you'll be able to read all about that. Once that paper is published, it will certainly be available to the public. And as I said, we are continuing to collect this data as time goes on. Larry, do you have anything else you want to add about that study?
No,
okay.
I'm frantically answering chat questions.
Okay, good. You continue to do that.
And you're doing a great job, Larry.
Thanks.
Well done. All right, so to shift gears again, the next thing is we are involved in an urban wildlife study, and this is a partnership with the Urban Wildlife Institute, which is out of Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. A wonderful organization that has been put together, a consortium of scientific organizations. I'm going to show you on the next slide, but we refer to this as UWIN, Urban Wildlife Information Network. And so what this is an attempt to study and document urban wildlife populations across an urban to rural transect. So what this organization has done is it has pulled together partners from across North America to look at urban wildlife, including coyotes. We were doing this kind of work anyway, and so we were asked to take part in it, and we gladly accepted. And so the idea is that you deploy cameras along this transect. It's a 50-kilometer transect, and by that I just simply mean we established an imaginary line starting in downtown Atlanta and essentially drew a line, in this case north, all the way to Milton. So the transect is 50 kilometers long by 4 kilometers wide, and then we dispersed cameras throughout that transect. I'll show you a map of it in just a moment. And so the cameras get turned on at least for 1 month in each of the 4 seasons. So January, April, July, and October those are our data collection months, although we oftentimes let the cameras just go. And and organizations are doing this across North America. And so the goal is to document biodiversity along the transect. Do we see patterns from urban to rural? Do we see certain species in certain areas and not in other areas? Do we see certain species together, or do we see certain species that do not coexist? So lots of things we can learn from this. We've got students from Berry College, from Emory University, from Georgia Tech, from the University of Georgia, all involved in this. We've got citizen scientists, we've got volunteers, some of whom are, I think, on this Zoom webinar, which we're just very grateful for all of your help and enthusiasm and cooperation. And so we can study urban biodiversity within Atlanta and then make comparisons to other North American cities. And so here's the current UN network. And in fact, this is probably even a little bit outdated. And this is a little small, I realize, to see, but here's a map of North America, and all of these red dots represent cities that are partners. And so you can see Edmonton, you've got Seattle, Tacoma, you've got a number out in California, you've got Colorado, here we are in Georgia, you've got Chicago, Iowa. This is really a great organization. Larry and I were at a conference in Chicago of all of these partners back in November. It's mainly scientists, ecologists, biologists, but there are also landscape designers, landscape architects, city planners, that are part of this organization, understanding the value of wildlife to urban environments. Well, why? Well, why study urban wildlife? Well, it allows us to develop an understanding of urban ecosystems. It allows us to investigate landscape, connectivity, and function. You've got green spaces, that are dispersed throughout cities like Piedmont Park is. Here's another one of Larry's pictures, and so how are these areas connected to one another? How does can wildlife get from one place to another? Is it prohibitive for some species to get from one place to another, where it is more feasible for other species, larger species like a coyote, for example? So also this education and understanding allows us to potentially mitigate human-wildlife conflict. And then it also encourages biophilia. Biophilia, a term that was coined by famous biologist E.O. Wilson. Biophilia is a love of the living world. It's a connection to the natural world. And so, which we have too little of these days, particularly in urban environments. And so this is a growing field. We're thrilled to be part of this network of scientists and biologists who are studying urban wildlife. It's a very important topic, we believe. So we've established this transect. We actually established it back in December of 2018. What we did was we just drew, these are 5-kilometer rings. So each one of these rings is 5 kilometers out. And then we just started looking for camera sites. Here's a close-up view of it over here on the right-hand side. So we're trying to get to 40 cameras. It's always a moving target. We have somewhere between 32 and 36 cameras. Cameras get stolen, they malfunction, they get flooded, whatever happens. It's just always a challenge keeping up with these cameras. But so far I think this is now we're getting close to 100,000 photos collected, and those all have to be sorted and identified. Thank you to our students and our volunteers who help us to do that. So, and I will tell you that we are obviously particularly interested in coyotes, but we're interested in all forms of wildlife. But I will tell you that we've detected coyotes at all but 4 of our camera sites over the past year. That's just in 2019. And where are these cameras? Well, just some iconic places like Grant Park, the Carter Center, Piedmont Park, Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, the Atlanta History Center, Chattahoochee Nature Center, golf courses up here, some areas near Emory University. So they're all over town. It takes a lot to stay on top of monitoring these cameras, but it's been a really worthwhile project, and it's really just getting going now. And we'll be sharing that data and hopefully publishing on that data in the not too distant future. Here's a few highlights just from those pictures. Here's a red fox with a squirrel in its mouth. This was actually at the Carter Center, I believe. Here's a bobcat. Sort of blends in. That's more towards the northern end of the transect. Here's a coyote. This is in Inman Park. For those of you from Atlanta, this is in Inman Park. Here's a mink, an American mink. This is in Roswell, near Roswell Area Park. Here is coyote and Mr. Possum having a little adventure together that didn't end well for the possum, unfortunately. But you know, that's the kinds of things that we get on these cameras. Here's a barred owl. This is again from Piedmont Park. Here's a North American beaver. Here's a Cooper's hawk. So we're just seeing and documenting, you know, all of these forms of biodiversity. And again, we can make comparisons not only along our transect, but with partners from across North America, and we can share each other's data and make comparisons. So it's really a wonderful collaboration. Okay, finally, that brings me to Carmine. So some of you may be familiar with the story of Carmine, but I'll just briefly tell you about it. So Carmine is a black coyote, melanistic. So I mentioned earlier that coat color is not always a good way to distinguish these animals, but we got reports coming out of Smyrna Vinings area in late December 2019. My friend Chris Hoffman, I believe, is on this webinar, called me. I knew her from a few years ago, and we've looked at some persimmon trees in her backyard where she had coyotes, and Chris called me and said, hey, there are reports of a friendly, playful coyote roaming around Smyrna Vinings. It's jumping fences and playing with dogs. It's following people when they're walking their dogs. It tried to go through someone's doggy door. And so this is very unusual behavior. Coyotes, as I said, are usually very secretive and very elusive. This animal was not exhibiting any sort of aggressive behavior. On the contrary, it was being very friendly. So I called my friend Brandon Sanders, who has a humane, no-kill wildlife management company. And I sort of jokingly said, hey, Brandon, you want to go check out this coyote? And he said, yes, I would. And then I called up our new friends at Yellow River Wildlife Sanctuary. Yellow River used to be the Yellow River Game Ranch. It was recently has been converted to the Yellow River Wildlife Sanctuary. It's in Lilburn, a wonderful place. They had a resident coyote already on their site that it had been hand raised. It could not be released back in to the wild, so they had it. Larry and I had been working with them on some educational material. So I called them up and sort of half jokingly said, hey, do you want another coyote? And they said, yes, in fact, we would. And so the stars started to align. We would not have intervened otherwise, but we realized that this was a situation that was not going to end well with a wild animal, a coyote, running around, trying to play with dogs. It was probably not going to end well. So we partnered with Brandon and Sanders Wildlife in an attempt to try to capture this animal. We had published previously a paper in a journal called Southeastern Naturalist about melanism in coyotes. It's a relatively rare trait. It's more common here in the Southeast. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into all of that right now, but you can again go back and read this paper on our website if you'd like. We're working with Bridget, again, in her lab to investigate more about this melanistic coat coloration. But anyway, just to finish the story of Carmine, we started receiving through our website pictures of Carmine that people were sending us. Hey, I spotted this black coyote. So, and by the way, so this was a picture of Carmine. This is a picture that Larry took once we got Carmine into captivity, this one on the right. But this is a picture by Jessica Slater. Carmine walked up onto her back porch and she took this picture. These are other pictures we started to receive. This is a map that we put together. So again, if you're familiar with Atlanta, here's 285, here's 75. The Braves Stadium is right about there. This is one of the busiest highway interchanges in the entire city. And so we started mapping all of these locations. Yellow is December. There are lots of yellow. You can't see them. Under the blue is January, and black is February. These red dots right here, these are culverts that go under 285. 285 being 10 lanes of traffic. Here's a picture of what one of those culverts, it's a big tunnel. Carmine was going back and forth through those culverts, we're almost certain. And it was just incredible. We were practically tracking this animal in real time. Brandon set up traps. He set a trap there. This was the very first night. We put a little stuffed animal. Carmine didn't go in the trap, but he took the stuffed animal. Here he entered someone's porch and spent the night. We had a trap on the porch, but he would not go into the trap. We lost Carmine for a week, but we got a report that here he was on one day, and the next day we came to learn he was in East Cobb. So he had made it somehow in a day from down here in Smyrna Vinings, across all of these major highways. We believe he went under them and along the Chattahoochee and ended up here in East Cobb. So let me show you a little bit about, if you haven't seen this, what Carmine was doing. You're going to see Carmine playing with a Great Pyrenees dog. And this video is by Vanessa Pryor, one of our friends who took this. You can see Carmine is very playful. He was showing up routinely to come and play with his dog and play in this water. You're going to see they're going to walk next to each other. There's no sign of aggression. They would wrestle and play. And he was doing this all over town with a variety of different dogs. This video went out on CNN. It's been seen worldwide, I believe. So we knew, again, we were following Carmine around. So, so eventually Laura Shaw, who I think also is on this webinar, Laura Shaw with an organization called Angels Among Us, they do great work helping to track down lost dogs. And so Laura offered her assistance to try to help us to catch Carmine. And so with the help of Laura and Brandon, we caught Carmine in East Cobb on February the 16th. And so there's Brandon and myself. Laura took this picture. There's Carmine in Laura's cage there. And so he was docile. It was great. We got him. Brandon and I, in the middle of the night, took him over to Yellow River Wildlife Sanctuary, where he eventually, so I'll just kind of go through this. He had a veterinary exam. We discovered, we didn't know if Carmine was male or female. Turns out that he was a male. He was about a year old, so he had probably been born the previous year. Remember, they're very seasonal breeders. He was 38 pounds at capture, which is very large, again, for a coyote. And that's probably because he was being fed all while he was out wandering around Atlanta. No intestinal parasites, which was sort of interesting. You know, again, for an animal living out on the streets like that, we're not really sure why that is, but interestingly, Carmine was relatively healthy. And so we relocated him to Yellow River Wildlife Sanctuary. So after a month in quarantine, Carmine was gradually introduced to the resident coyote, Wiley. And there's cute little Wiley, a spayed female. They were immediately playful with one another, and they are both doing very well. And by the way, Carmine has been neutered, so there's no attempt at reproduction going on here, just companionship. And so Yellow River has done a wonderful job at building an enclosure for Wiley and Carmine with Brandon's help. Larry's been out there as well, and now you can go out and visit Carmine and Wiley. And so, you know, it was certainly with mixed emotions that we took this wild animal and put it into captivity. But again, given the circumstances, we felt that it was best to try and intervene, and so we did. So what can we learn from Carmine? Well, we can learn more about the movement and ranging patterns of urban coyotes, which we already have. We saw how far and wide Carmine traveled. It just really was amazing to us. We did take tissue samples, blood. That blood was sent to Bridget's lab. We'll eventually learn more about the genetic basis of this black or melanistic phenotype. You know, just what is it about Carmine's DNA? Can we learn some things about it? something else very interesting that Bridget's lab has discovered, and again, if she wants to say more about this, I'll certainly let her, but her lab has discovered the presence of a gene for hypersociability. In other words, and this was discovered in wolves and dogs. And so this is likely what we as humans were selecting for as we were creating the domestic dog. We were probably, selecting for those gray wolves that were exhibiting those kinds of behaviors that we found most desirable. And there is likely a genetic underlying cause for that. So again, if I'm saying this correctly, Bridget, I think the possibility to look for the presence of this gene, at least we've got one example of an animal exhibiting this so-called hypersocial behavior. Can we look for an underlying genetic cause? And then also Carmine can teach us by being a public ambassador for coyotes. And so the public can go out and see him, they can see these animals, they can learn more about coyotes. And so we hope that he can fulfill that role as well. So I know we're getting near the end of time here. I just have one last slide. I do want to recognize all of our partner organizations, of course, Berry College and Emory University, but we also Aware Wildlife Center, Sandy Springs Environmental Project, Chattahoochee Nature Center, Blue Heron Nature Preserve, Georgia Power, Fernbank Science Center, Trees Atlanta, Emerald Corridor Foundation, Atlanta Bourbon, Sanders Wildlife, and then Bridget's organization, her group, North American Canine Ancestry, out of Princeton University. So I'm going to stop there, and I know that Larry has been, sorry, I'm going to do that. I know that Larry has been answering questions, and so Bridget, if you want to unmute, or maybe Dottie, if you wanted to unmute Bridget, just in case anybody has any questions, or if anybody wants to weigh in. Larry, have we answered all questions, or?
I think I'm getting close. There's a bunch at the end. Somebody said, does anyone know the family Carmine came from? We have not determined that he was ever with a family. There are people that speculate that. Michael said something about Googling Romeo, the friendly wolf from Alaska. I'm actually reading that book right now. It is a very similar story, and for 5 or 6 years, he actually was pretty happy. So it didn't have a good ending, and that's one of the things we were so afraid of. And it was a tough decision. I still have questioned myself for that whole decision. And then somebody was saying, why did we have him neutered? There's a couple things. It's having him in captivity. He was a young male, and they were always afraid that he might get aggressive, maybe aggressive to his cage mate. But also, what do you do with animal? If they did have offspring, now you've got a breeding colony, and that's not what a wildlife sanctuary is supposed to be doing.
Bridget, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm just going to give you an opportunity. If there's anything that you would like to add, or we have sent tissue to you, and if there's any, I'll just let you say anything you might want to say. And
before she does, is a couple people are asking, is Carmine a pure coyote, and a couple things like that. That's something until we run the DNA, and that's when COVID has kind of put that on hold. We will be able to make some determinations on that. Go ahead,
Yes.
Bridget.
Yes, that's absolutely right. We have been holding on to the samples received from Larry and Chris for a couple months now, since our labs have been shut down because of COVID, but I'm happy to report we opened up this week for a slow sort of resumption of activity, and I've been in lab for the past couple days working on preparing this DNA so we can find out if Carmine is a pure coyote or if there's something else happening, and we'll learn if there's any ancestry derived from dog, from gray wolf, from red wolf, or from eastern wolf. Those are, and additionally coyote, obviously, but we'll have all of those to try to give a profile for Carmine The second question I guess I quickly wanted to just say is the behavior, this very like friendly, playful behavior is phenomenal. I have not seen this actually before in coyote, and a lot of people do want to, you know, show me coyote videos and pictures. So we're also exploring whether or not Carmine has some of the mutations that we've discovered, which are found in really friendly dogs and friendly wolves. What's interesting is that the mutations are very different, which are found in the domesticated fox experiment. And I'm happy to share links to that for background information. But it seems to be the same genes get mutated to change these behaviors in both foxes and canines. So this is incredibly cool. We're gonna look into Carmine and see what he carries for mutations.
You know, I would also add that, you know, we don't have any reason to believe, you know, Carmine, if you saw Carmine, if you see Carmine, he's a coyote. You know, he behaves like a coyote, other than this, you know, as Bridget is saying, this, you know, he's very wary around humans. You know, we don't believe that he was put out by humans, he was raised by humans and then released. You know, he behaves around humans very much like a coyote. You know, coyotes are not aggressive towards humans. You know, they're wary, they keep their distance, and that's Carmine as well. You know, he just is friendly around other canids, you know, coyotes and dogs.
Right. So if I can also follow up, that it is not unusual to find these friendly mutations in wolves. We actually see them in several populations globally. So the way that, you know, we have domesticated dogs is that humans have taken advantage of this diversity of personality types in wolves. And there's no reason to think coyotes can't have the same mutations. And there's a lot of genetic theory to suggest that maybe these are genes that are very quick to mutate. So Carmine could just have a brand new mutation that's not found in either of his parents, but he might have the right mutation in the right gene that allows him to have a personality that's really kind of friendly and exploratory and very interested in interacting with anyone, whether it's a different species, whether it's a dog. So it's absolutely very, very feasible. It's just interesting because I've surveyed, I don't know, a couple hundred coyote DNA samples from North America, and we've only have found it in like 2 coyotes. So if Carmine has these mutations, this is an incredible moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll hope so.
And it should be pointed out is, you know, Carmine likes dogs. He tolerates people to some extent, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's the problem they're having out at Yellow River with visitors coming in, is he kind of freaks. He doesn't really like people that much. Loves dogs. In fact, seems to like dogs more than his coyote mate.
Dottie, I'll just ask you, how are we on time? Or,
we're fine. People can stay on. There's still some questions coming in. So, but if people are going to drop off, I just want to thank you and Larry and Bridget. Larry, for answering questions frantically, because I had none of the answers. Usually I can help with the bird questions, but I had none of the answers tonight. And Bridget, for letting us put you on the spot and bring you onto the panel. But
thank you, Bridget. Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot, but great to have you.
What a great way to end my day, to have conversations about coyote. This is amazing.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And so, Larry, so I think some people said, how can we help?
Okay, I've answered that.
Okay.
The main thing is education. Is get, you know, educate people that have these wrong ideas about coyotes. I think they see them as wolf size and are going to take down dogs and this sort of thing. And, you know, they are wild animals. You know, so it's not one of those things where, you know, just think they're all going to be friendly or something like that. Is, you know, treat them with respect. The main thing is don't feed them, don't get them habitualized to you. Just enjoy seeing them as wild animals as part of our natural environment. You know, worldwide, people have what I call predator prejudice. They just, for some reason, hate predators, whether it be coyotes, wolves, snakes, spiders, whatever is, particularly when there's something, when there's myths about it. So try to help people dispel myths, try to get people to our website. The biggest thing is educate people, and when you see one, let us know about it. Now, every once in a while there is a problem, with any animal. I mean, there's problems with dogs, and we need to understand that. But in most cases, when it's wild animals, it's because they've become habituated to people. People are feeding them either intentionally or inadvertently. They're leaving food out for the stray cats. They're leaving food out in the backyard for their dog. You just can't do that. Make sure your trash can's secured. If you live in a neighborhood and you don't want coyotes, if you see roadkill, get rid of it, because they love a free meal laying in the road. And in fact, we've found that in a few cases, when people are reporting that these things are eating and killing cats, is we can see that the cat's obviously in rigor mortis, and my guess is he's just picked it up off the road. But the other thing is, try to reduce interactions with your pets. We know these things are mainly crepusculars, dawn and dusk, and nocturnal. Don't let your pets out there, particularly if you got small pets. There actually are leash laws. If you follow the leash laws, you shouldn't have any problems with that. But I do very much recommend people visit our website as well. I always hate to be one of these people, but is you can also donate to the Atlanta Coyote Project, and it helps us get the word out.
Several people are asking about the DNR and the relationship and the bounties they put for the hunters on them. Do you all have anything to add on that?
Larry, you want to take that, Larry?
Well, right now, they did have a coyote killing contest. Fortunately, that has quietly gone away, and we all, we hate to say too much about it because we don't want it to come back. We do think a lot had to do with some of the data they were pushing, that coyotes were not native and were messing up the ecosystem and destroying animals' environments, and they're trying to protect it, and that was not the case. And our publication, I think, helped that, as well as some other coyote organizations that are just the mass killing of predators in general. It's just a wrong thing as far as ecosystems and food webs and things like that. And I know we're looking at maps. I might disagree a little bit with Chris. Is I do think coyotes were native to the east. I think there's a little bit of fossil evidence in West Virginia, Kentucky. There is some evidence that there were some prairie habitats, particularly in Tennessee, and I think early people drove them west, and they might just be returning because they don't have much competition. Because just competition from a wolf, we do realize, in places like Yellowstone, is they do coexist with wolves. Obviously, they're not the apex at all.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
And in some of these questions, there are places on our website where you can ask us specifically questions, both on our Facebook and our website.
Yeah, we do have a Facebook page as well and a website, and we can provide, I should also point out, information. We have brochures, we send out a lot. I'll get questions from neighborhoods. Can you, do you have something? What do I tell my neighbors? And we have some brochures that can be distributed electronically, or, so if you need information to distribute to your neighbors about why it's not a good idea to go trap and kill coyotes, we can send that. And by the way, getting Carmine, we had to go through the DNR, because any coyote that is trapped must be euthanized. And so we had to get permission to go through all of this, so it wasn't just, hey, let's go out and catch Carmine. We had to have a place for him, and we had to have permission from DNR to do this. And so that's
and it was quite an exception. And we do get a lot of emails. I've got this coyote. Can you trap him and get him out of our backyard? No, that's not what we want to do. This was kind of an exception, and anything that has potential of carrying rabies, whether it be fox, raccoons, coyotes, there's great restrictions about taking them out of the wild and doing anything with them.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think, well, there's some more questions coming in, but I think for the time factor, we need to wrap this up. You can reach out to the Coyote Project. Their website we put in the chat is coyoteproject.org. And we are recording this webinar and we'll download it, and it will be available for future viewing within 48 hours on our AtlantaAudubon.org website. I'll also share it with Chris and Larry in case they'd like to share it somewhere. It'll be on YouTube. But thank you all very much for coming. Larry, Chris, and Bridget, thank you for being part of our panel. And you all have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you, Bridget. This is the first time I've ever seen your face.
I know. It's great to see you.
Yes, definitely.
And you too,
And I should say that a link to Bridget's lab is on our website as well at the bottom. So if you want to learn more about Bridget's work, you can get to her through our website at the bottom.
Terrific. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.